hallway smelled of polished marble and secrets. Aaliyah Johnson stood frozen near the elevator, her phone vibrating in her palm like a quiet warning. Upstairs, behind a numbered door, she had never entered before, her husband was laughing with another woman, spending a night he had promised was another business trip. When his message finally came, it wasn't guilt that reached her. It was confidence, cold, certain, as if betrayal were a privilege he had earned. Aaliyah didn't cry, she didn't knock. She stared at the screen where one small detail glowed brighter than the rest, the room number. In that moment, she understood something Marcus never would. Some truths don't need confrontation. They need witnesses. And the most dangerous response to betrayal isn't rage, it's precision. Before we step into the story, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. And if stories about quiet strength, delayed justice, and powerful women speak to you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and stay with us until the end. To the outside world, Aaliyah Johnson had the kind of marriage people admired from a distance. She and Marcus Johnson had been together for nearly 15 years, long enough to build a shared history, long enough for their names to sound natural together, long enough for silence to be mistaken for stability. At charity dinners, Marcus would place a hand at the small of her back, a practiced gesture that photographers loved. Aaliyah would smile composed and elegant, never stealing the spotlight, never demanding attention. People called them solid, private goals. What they didn't see was how carefully Aaliyah had learned to make herself small. In the early years, Marcus hadn't been cruel. He had been ambitious, charming, and endlessly certain of his own direction. He talked about the future as if it were a contract already signed. Aaliyah listened. She supported. She adjusted. When he worked late, she rearranged dinners. When his career accelerated, she slowed her own. Not because he asked her to, but because the space around him quietly demanded it. Over time, his presence filled every room while hers learned how to disappear. The changes didn't arrive all at once. They never do. They slipped in disguised as practicality. Marcus began managing the finances to make things easier. He questioned her purchases with a casual sharpness that felt almost playful. He stopped asking for her opinion and started informing her of decisions already made. When she disagreed, he didn't argue, he dismissed. With a laugh, with a sigh, with that look that suggested she was emotional, not logical. Aaliyah adapted. She always did. She told herself this was what marriage looked like after the honeymoon phase. Quiet, predictable, efficient. She told herself that love didn't need constant reassurance. She told herself that trust was proven by not asking questions. And for a long time, Marcus seemed to reward her silence with comfort. A beautiful home, social invitations, a life that looked successful enough to silence doubt. But comfort, Aaliyah would later understand, is often just control wearing a softer mask. The first real crack appeared on an ordinary Tuesday. Marcus came home later than usual, his tie loosened, his phone clutched too tightly in his hand. He kissed her cheek without meeting her eyes and walked straight past her toward the shower. "Long day?" Aaliyah asked from the kitchen. "Always," he replied, already down the hall. It wasn't the answer that unsettled her. It was the speed, the way he had prepared it in advance. That night, she noticed his phone lighting up again and again on the nightstand. He turned it face down. When she asked about his weekend plans, he told her he'd be traveling another last-minute trip, another city she wouldn't visit, another schedule that didn't include her. She nodded. She always nodded. But something had shifted. Aaliyah didn't confront him. She didn't scroll through his phone or demand explanations. She did something far quieter. She paid attention. She noticed how his stories stopped lining up, how expenses appeared without context, how names were mentioned once and never again. She noticed how he began treating their home like a hotel, arriving late, leaving early, contributing presence, but not intimacy. And most of all, she noticed how easily he lied, not with fear, not with guilt, with confidence. That confidence told her more than any confession ever could. Still, Aaliyah said nothing. She had learned long ago that men like Marcus felt most powerful when challenged directly. Anger gave them something to fight. Tears gave them something to dismiss. Silence, however, that unsettled them. Silence created space. And space was where truth revealed itself. Weeks passed, then months. Marcus grew bolder. He stopped pretending to hide his absences. When she asked if he would be home for dinner, he answered without apology that he had other commitments. When she suggested a short trip together, he smiled as if indulging a child and said, "Maybe later." Later never came. Aaliyah began to understand her position clearly. She wasn't his partner anymore. She was his background. Yet even then, she didn't act. Not because she was weak, but because she was waiting. The confirmation came on a night that should have been forgettable. Marcus claimed he was meeting a client. He dressed carefully, more carefully than usual. Aaliyah watched him adjust his jacket in the mirror, watched the satisfaction flicker across his face. He looked pleased in a way that had nothing to do with work. After he left the house, felt unnaturally quiet. An hour later, her phone buzzed with a notification, one she hadn't expected from a service account she rarely used. A booking confirmation, a luxury hotel, downtown, and a room number. Aaliyah stared at the screen, her heartbeat steady, her breathing slow. There was no shock left in her, only clarity. So this was how Marcus intended to live now, openly careless, certain of his invisibility. She didn't follow him. She didn't call. She didn't text. She sat at the dining table, the same table where they had once planned futures and signed holiday cards together. And she let the truth settle fully into her bones. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a phase. It was a decision one Marcus had made repeatedly, with confidence believing there would be no consequences. That belief was his greatest error. Because Aaliyah Johnson was not the woman he thought he had married. She had been quiet, yes. Accommodating, yes. But she had also been watching, learning, understanding the structures he relied on. The family he feared disappointing. The reputation he protected more fiercely than his vows. And as she looked again at the hotel booking at the room number glowing patiently on her screen, Aaliyah felt no urge to intervene directly. Some doors she knew were best opened by the right people. She picked up her phone not to confront her husband, but to choose her first move. Carefully, precisely. Aaliyah Johnson didn't become careful overnight. Carefulness had been trained into her, shaped by years of learning when to speak and when silence carried more weight. So when the hotel booking settled into her awareness like a cold stone, she didn't rush to conclusions. She adjusted her posture, cleared the table, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. In the morning, Marcus returned with the ease of a man who believed himself untouchable. He smelled faintly of cologne that wasn't his usual brand. He kissed her forehead, not her lips, and poured himself coffee as if nothing in the world had shifted. "You're up early," he said, glancing at his watch. "I couldn't sleep," Aaliyah replied. He nodded, uninterested. "I have a long day." She watched him speak, watched the way he avoided specifics, watched the confidence in his movements. This was not a man afraid of being caught. This was a man convinced that even if he were, it wouldn't matter. That was the moment Aaliyah stopped wondering if he was lying and began asking how long he had been lying. She started with small things. Marcus claimed he had a late meeting on Thursday. Aaliyah checked the calendar for the firm's public events. Nothing. He said he'd be out of town the following weekend. She noticed he packed lighter than usual. He mentioned a colleague named Kay. Only once. Never again. She didn't investigate like someone hunting for proof. She observed like someone assembling a pattern. Patterns were harder to deny. She noticed charges appearing on a credit card she rarely used. Expenses too intimate to be business-related, too frequent to be coincidence. She noticed how his phone was never left unattended anymore, how it followed him even into the shower. She noticed how when she entered a room, conversation stopped. Marcus had grown comfortable enough to be careless, but not careless enough to be stupid. He wasn't leaving obvious evidence behind. He was leaving traces the kind only someone who already knew where to look would recognize. And Aaliyah knew exactly where to look. What surprised her most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the emotional distance she felt from it. There was no dramatic heartbreak, no collapsing grief. Instead, there was a strange calm, as if her body had prepared for this, long before her mind allowed it. She realized something unsettling. She had been grieving this marriage for years without knowing it. The confirmation came not through a confrontation, but through timing. Marcus told her he'd be out late again, something about a client dinner. He said it casually, already halfway out the door. Aaliyah nodded, then paused. "Which restaurant?" she asked. He stopped just long enough for a flicker of irritation to cross his face. "I'm not sure yet." It was a small lie, a sloppy one, because the charge appeared less than an hour later. Same hotel, same room. Aaliyah sat alone in the living room, the quiet pressing in on her from all sides. The house felt different now, not empty, but revealing. Every corner held a memory she could suddenly see clearly, the compromises she had made. The conversations she had swallowed, the warnings she had ignored because facing them felt too disruptive. She understood now that Marcus hadn't changed. He had simply stopped pretending. That night she drove, not to the hotel, not to confront him. She drove through the city with no destination, letting the movement steady her thoughts. Streetlights blurred past the windshield. Couples laughed on sidewalks. Life continued indifferent to her personal reckoning. By the time she returned home, Aaliyah had made a decision not about leaving, not about revenge, but about awareness. She would no longer be confused. From that night forward, she documented everything, not obsessively, not emotionally, but methodically. Dates, times, locations. She saved receipts. She archived messages. She listened carefully when Marcus spoke, noting what he said and what he avoided. She didn't change her behavior. That was key. She still cooked dinner, still attended events by his side, still smiled when required. She didn't grow colder or more distant because distance would have alerted him. Instead, she became more neutral, present, but unengaged. Marcus mistook her composure for ignorance. That mistake gave her time. The first time Aaliyah saw them together, it wasn't planned. She had finished an errand early and stopped by a cafe near Marcus's office, one she rarely visited. As she stepped inside, her attention was drawn immediately to a familiar laugh, too relaxed, too unguarded to belong to a man on a business call. Marcus sat by the window. Across from him sat a woman younger than Aaliyah, her posture open, her body angled inward, as if the world outside the table didn't exist. Her hand rested lightly on Marcus's arm, not tentatively, not secretly, comfortably. Aaliyah didn't freeze. She didn't turn away. She observed. The woman, Kayla Reynolds, leaned closer as Marcus spoke. She smiled in a way that suggested entitlement, not infatuation. This wasn't a fleeting affair. This was a relationship that had been rehearsed. Marcus didn't look over his shoulder. He didn't scan the room. Why would he? In his mind, Aaliyah existed only where he left her. She left the cafe without being seen, her expression unchanged, her steps measured. Outside, the air felt sharper, more real. There was no doubt left now, no illusion to preserve. Still, she didn't confront him, because confrontation was temporary. Consequences were permanent. At home that evening, Marcus complained about traffic and deadlines. Aaliyah listened. She asked neutral questions. She gave him nothing he could use against her later. That night, she lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, and made another decision. If Marcus believed he could live two lives without collision, then she would be the one to choose the moment of impact. And when it came, it wouldn't be loud. It would be undeniable. She understood now that power didn't come from exposing betrayal. It came from controlling who saw it and when. As Marcus drifted to sleep beside her, unaware of the clarity forming inches away, Aaliyah closed her eyes with a sense of resolve she had never felt before. She wasn't planning a scene. She was preparing a reckoning. The truth didn't arrive as a single blow. It settled into Aaliyah Johnson's life the way dust does, quietly, persistently, until every surface reflected it back at her. After the cafe, there was no room left for denial. No soft explanations, no benefit of the doubt. Marcus Johnson was not drifting away from their marriage. He had already built something parallel to it. And he walked between the two with ease. What unsettled Aaliyah wasn't the existence of Kayla Reynolds. It was the confidence with which Marcus inhabited his deception. He no longer acted like a man afraid of being discovered. He acted like a man who believed discovery would change nothing. That belief changed everything. Aaliyah didn't cry that night, or the next. The tears had nowhere to land. Grief required surprise, and she had already moved beyond it. What filled the space instead was a sharpened awareness, an ability to see Marcus as he truly was, stripped of the version she had protected for years. She began to notice how often he revised reality. When she asked about his day, he answered vaguely, then grew impatient if she followed up. When she mentioned a shared memory, he corrected it casually, as if her recollection were unreliable. When she expressed discomfort, he reframed it as overreaction. It was subtle. It always had been. Marcus didn't just lie about his actions. He lied about meaning. And Aaliyah understood now that his betrayal wasn't confined to another woman. It extended into language, memory, and power. She kept watching. The next time Marcus said he would be out late, Aaliyah didn't respond immediately. She waited several seconds, just long enough to make him glance up from his phone. "Okay," she said calmly. He looked almost disappointed, as if he had been prepared for resistance. Later that night, when his location notification refreshed another hotel, another room number. Aaliyah felt something close to relief. Each confirmation freed her further from the need to question herself. She wasn't imagining this. She wasn't misinterpreting. She wasn't wrong. The realization brought clarity, and with it, a kind of quiet strength. Aaliyah began to understand Marcus's patterns with unnerving precision. The days he chose for his absences. The tone he used when he was lying versus when he was merely avoiding the truth. The way his mood improved after nights away, as if he returned replenished, unburdened by the performance of being a husband. Kayla Reynolds wasn't a secret anymore. She was a fixture, and fixtures Aaliyah knew could be removed. But not carelessly. One evening, Marcus came home later than usual, humming to himself as he loosened his tie. He poured a drink without offering her one, something he had stopped doing months ago. "You seem relaxed," Aaliyah said lightly. "Good meeting," he replied. She watched the lie form and settle on his face with ease. It was almost impressive. That night, she went through old photographs not to reminisce, but to observe. She saw herself smiling in the background of his accomplishments, always slightly behind, always angled toward him. She saw how often she had framed her presence around his ambitions. She closed the album and understood something fundamental: Marcus hadn't stolen her future. He had simply assumed it belonged to him. That assumption would be corrected. The next encounter with Kayla came days later, and this time it wasn't accidental. Marcus had mentioned a conference downtown. Aaliyah recognized the venue. She also recognized the restaurant nearby, one Marcus used to reserve for anniversaries back when he still pretended to be present. She arrived early and took a seat where she could see without being seen. Kayla arrived first. She was confident, well-dressed, moving through the space as if she belonged there. When Marcus joined her, the familiarity between them was unmistakable. There was no hesitation, no need for discretion. He kissed her cheek openly. She laughed, touching his wrist as she spoke. Aaliyah felt no anger. What she felt was confirmation. This wasn't an affair built on secrecy or shame. This was a man who believed his double life was sustainable, and a woman who believed she was winning something worth having. Aaliyah left before the drinks arrived. That night, Marcus didn't come home. He didn't bother to explain the next morning either. He simply resumed his routine, confident in her silence, unaware that her silence had changed meaning. She wasn't quiet because she was afraid. She was quiet because she was finished negotiating with reality. Aaliyah began to shift internally, even if nothing on the surface changed. She stopped waiting for him to notice her, stopped adjusting her schedule to accommodate his. She reclaimed small pieces of herself, morning walks, unanswered texts, evenings spent reading instead of watching the door. Marcus noticed the changes, but misread them. "You've been distant lately," he said one evening, his tone more annoyed than concerned. "I've been busy," Aaliyah replied. "With what living?" she said evenly. He laughed it off unconcerned. But something had shifted in the air between them. Marcus could feel it, even if he didn't understand it. The dynamic he relied on her availability, her predictability, was slipping. And unpredictability unsettled him. What Marcus didn't realize was that Aaliyah had already mapped out the terrain ahead. She had identified the pressure points that mattered to him, his family's opinion, his reputation, the image he guarded so carefully. She understood now that Marcus feared exposure not to strangers, but to those whose respect he had built his identity around. That knowledge didn't make her cruel. It made her strategic. One night, as Marcus slept beside her, Aaliyah stared into the darkness and thought not of revenge, but of alignment, of restoring balance, of ensuring that truth reached the ears it needed to reach. She didn't want to scream. She didn't want to destroy him publicly. She wanted him to face consequences he couldn't dismiss. And for the first time since the betrayal began, Aaliyah allowed herself a small, private smile. The truth was no longer something she feared. It was something she held. And soon she would decide exactly where to place it. The night Marcus disappeared without pretense felt different from the others. There was no excuse prepared in advance, no mention of meetings or flights. He simply glanced at his phone, slipped on his jacket, and said, "I'll be late," as if the statement required no acknowledgement. Aaliyah watched him from the doorway, memorizing the angle of his shoulders as he left the confidence in his stride. This wasn't secrecy anymore. It was entitlement. The house settled into silence after the door closed, the kind that presses against the ears. Aaliyah stood still for a long moment, then moved through the space, methodically turning off lights, locking doors, grounding herself in routine. She refused to let the absence define the night. It was nearly midnight when her phone vibrated. A confirmation alert. Not sent to her directly, misrouted careless, or perhaps assumed irrelevant. A luxury hotel downtown. One she recognized instantly. And beneath it a detail Marcus had never bothered to hide carefully enough. Room number. Aaliyah sat down at the kitchen table, the glow of the screen illuminating her hands. She didn't feel shock. She didn't feel pain. What she felt was a quiet narrowing of focus, like the world reducing itself to a single, unmistakable fact. Marcus wasn't trying to hide anymore, because he believed that there was nothing left to lose. That belief gave her clarity. She didn't call him. She didn't text. She didn't ask questions she already knew the answers to. Instead, she let the confirmation sit there, undeniable, precise. This wasn't suspicion. This was proof. Aaliyah poured herself a glass of water and took a slow sip. She felt steady, more steady than she had in months. The decision forming inside her wasn't emotional. It was measured. She thought briefly about driving to the hotel, about standing in that hallway, about confronting him face to face. The image passed through her mind like a test she had already failed in another life. No. Confrontation would give Marcus something he didn't deserve: control over the narrative. He would deny, deflect, minimize. He would turn the focus onto her reaction instead of his actions. Aaliyah wasn't interested in arguments. She was interested in outcomes. She picked up her phone and scrolled to a name she rarely contacted but knew by heart: Aaliyah Johnson, her mother-in-law, the woman whose approval Marcus valued above almost everything else. The woman who believed fiercely in appearances and family reputation, in the unspoken rules that kept their world orderly and respectable. Evelyn didn't tolerate chaos. She tolerated silence. Aaliyah understood that better than Marcus ever had. Before dialing, she paused not out of hesitation, but intention. She considered the words she would use, the tone she would adopt. She would not accuse. She would not explain. She would not ask for sympathy. She would simply provide information and let the truth do the rest. The phone rang twice before Evelyn answered. Aaliyah. Her voice was surprised alert. Is everything all right? Yes, Aaliyah said calmly. I'm sorry to call so late. There was a pause. What's going on? Aaliyah didn't rush. I wasn't sure if Marcus mentioned it, but he won't be home tonight. Evelyn exhaled sharply. Again, I thought you should know where he is. Aaliyah continued, her voice even. In case you wanted to reach him. Another pause. Longer this time. Where is he? Evelyn asked. Aaliyah glanced at the screen, confirming the details she already knew. Crescent Hotel, downtown. Evelyn said nothing. And his room number, Aaliyah added gently, is 1418. Silence. Not confusion, not disbelief. Recognition. Evelyn's breath changed on the line. Why would you have that I received a confirmation? Aaliyah replied. I thought it was meant for him. The lie was small, polite, and unnecessary, but it allowed Evelyn to preserve her own dignity in the moment. I see, Evelyn said finally, her tone controlled but tight. Thank you for telling me. You're welcome, Aaliyah said. I didn't know who else to call. They ended the conversation without further explanation. Aaliyah set the phone down carefully as if it were something fragile, then leaned back in her chair. Her heart beat steadily. There was no rush of triumph, no sense of victory, only certainty. The truth was no longer hers alone. Across the city, Marcus remained unaware that the walls around his carefully separated worlds were beginning to close in. Evelyn didn't hesitate. Within minutes, she had called Harold Johnson, her husband, her voice low and urgent. Harold listened in silence, then said only, "Get your coat." They didn't call Marcus. They didn't warn him. They gathered two close relatives, people who understood the weight of family reputation, who would not speak out of turn. This wasn't about punishment. It was about witnessing. On the drive to the hotel, Evelyn stared out the window, her jaw clenched. Marcus's face filled her thoughts, not the successful man she had bragged about to friends, but the boy she had raised to understand better than this. Harold said nothing. His silence was heavier than anger. Meanwhile, Aaliyah remained at home. She didn't pace. She didn't wait by the phone. She prepared for bed, washed her face, changed into clean clothes. She moved through the night with intention, refusing to let Marcus's choices dictate her state of mind. She knew what was happening now. She didn't need updates. There was a particular kind of power in absence. At the hotel, the Johnson family walked through the lobby with quiet authority. Evelyn approached the front desk, her posture unmistakable. "We're here to see our son," she said. "Room 1418. The receptionist hesitated, then nodded, recognizing the tone of someone who would not be denied. Upstairs, the hallway was hushed. Plush carpet muffled footsteps. The room number glowed softly at the end of the corridor. Evelyn stopped in front of the door. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes, not to brace herself, but to center her resolve. Then she knocked. Inside, Marcus laughed. The sound cut through the door like a blade. Evelyn raised her hand and knocked again, harder this time. The laughter stopped. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Marcus's face drained of color. Behind him, Kayla Reynolds stood frozen in her robe, half-tied, her confidence evaporating in an instant. Time seemed to slow. This was not the exposure Marcus had imagined, not the confrontation he had rehearsed excuses for. This was something far worse. This was family. And as the truth spilled into the hallway, undeniable, witnessed, irreversible. Marcus understood too late that Aaliyah Johnson had never needed to raise her voice. She had simply chosen the right audience. The door to room 1418 stood open, and with it, Marcus Johnson's carefully separated worlds collapsed into one narrow hallway. For a moment, no one spoke. Evelyn Johnson's eyes moved slowly from Marcus's stunned expression to the unfamiliar woman behind him, then to the scattered details that required no explanation. An open suitcase, 2 glasses on the nightstand, a jacket Marcus had worn to a family dinner only weeks earlier. Kayla Reynolds took an instinctive step back, pulling the robe tighter around herself. Her confidence, so effortless in restaurants and quiet corners, had no place here. Mom, Marcus began. Evelyn raised her hand. The gesture was small, but it stopped him completely. "Don't," she said. Her voice was calm, almost restrained, and that frightened him more than anger would have. "Not here, not now." Harold Johnson stood just behind her, his face unreadable. He didn't step forward. He didn't need to. His silence carried judgment more effectively than words. "This isn't what it looks like," Marcus said, automatically grasping for control. "I can explain." Evelyn finally looked at him fully. "Then explain," she said, "because from where I'm standing, you've humiliated your wife, your family, and yourself." Kayla opened her mouth, then closed it again. She wasn't part of this conversation. She never had been. A door down the hall opened briefly, then shut. The hotel, designed for discretion, suddenly felt exposed. Evelyn turned to Kayla. "You should get dressed," she said coolly. "This is not your place to stand." Kayla flushed, anger and shame colliding in her expression. She glanced at Marcus, searching for reassurance. He didn't give it. He was too busy trying to survive. As Kayla retreated into the bathroom, Evelyn stepped inside the room. Harold followed. The relatives remained in the hallway, witnesses rather than participants. Marcus closed the door slowly behind them. "What were you thinking?" Evelyn asked, finally letting the restraint crack. "In a hotel in the city. Do you have any idea how easily this could have become public?" Marcus ran a hand through his hair. "I had it under control." Evelyn laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You had nothing under control. You were careless because you thought you were safe." Harold spoke for the first time. "Where is Aaliyah?" Marcus hesitated. "At home." "And she knows?" Harold asked. Marcus swallowed. "Not exactly." Evelyn's gaze sharpened. "She called me," she said. The room went still. Marcus stared at her. "She did what?" "She told me where you were," Evelyn replied. "She told me the room number." Calmly, respectfully. "She didn't accuse you. She didn't beg. She simply let me see you." Understanding hit Marcus all at once, heavy and suffocating. Aaliyah hadn't confronted him. She had bypassed him. Evelyn continued, her voice lower now. "Do you know how humiliating it is to stand in a hotel hallway and realize your son has become this man?" Marcus looked away. "It's complicated." "No," Harold said quietly. "It's simple. You chose this." Silence filled the room again, thicker than before. Kayla emerged from the bathroom, dressed, her face carefully composed, but brittle around the edges. "Marcus, we should go," she said softly. Evelyn turned toward her, her expression polite and distant. "You should leave," she said. "Now." Kayla bristled. "Excuse me." "The situation does not involve you anymore," Evelyn replied, and it never truly did. Kayla's jaw tightened. She looked to Marcus again, waiting for him to defend her. He didn't. His gaze was fixed on the carpet. That was all the answer she needed. She picked up her bag and walked past them without another word, her heels echoing down the hallway. The sound lingered long after she was gone. When the door closed, Evelyn exhaled, slowly. "We're going home," she said to Marcus. "You're coming with us." "I can't just leave," Marcus started. "You can," Harold said. "And you will." Back at the house, Aaliyah Johnson moved through her evening as if nothing unusual were happening. She folded laundry. She set her phone face down. She didn't check for messages. She already knew. The knock at the door came just after midnight. Aaliyah opened it to find Evelyn and Harold standing on the porch, Marcus a step behind them. His eyes met hers briefly, wide, unsettled, stripped of certainty. "Aaliyah," Evelyn said. "May we come in?" "Of course," Aaliyah replied, stepping aside. They entered the living room, the familiar space suddenly charged with tension. Marcus remained standing, unsure where to place himself. Evelyn sat. Harold stood by the window. "I'm so sorry," Evelyn said. "For everything." Aaliyah nodded. "I understand." The simplicity of her response unsettled Marcus more than anger ever could have. Evelyn continued. "What you did tonight, it was difficult, but it was necessary. Aaliyah met her gaze. "I didn't want to embarrass anyone." "I know," Evelyn said softly. "That's what makes it worse." Marcus finally spoke. "Why didn't you just talk to me?" Aaliyah looked at him, not with bitterness, not with hurt, but with clarity. "Because you weren't listening," she said. "And you wouldn't have." He had no response. Harold turned from the window. "This ends now," he said. "Whatever you've been doing, whoever you've been seeing, it's over." Marcus opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. For the first time, he understood that this wasn't a discussion. Evelyn stood. "We'll give you both space," she said to Aaliyah. "But know this, we stand with you." After they left, Marcus remained where he was, the house feeling suddenly unfamiliar. Aaliyah spoke quietly. "You should pack a bag." "For how long?" he asked. "For now," she replied. He searched her face for anger, for pain, for anything he could negotiate with. He found none of it. As Marcus walked upstairs, Aaliyah sat down and closed her eyes. The truth was no longer hidden. The reckoning had begun. And she was ready for what came next. By morning, the story had already begun to spread quietly, efficiently through the channels Marcus Johnson had spent his life cultivating. It didn't explode on social media. There were no headlines, no public scandal. That would have been too crude. Instead, it traveled the way reputation always does among people who value it. Most phone calls made behind closed doors, carefully worded questions, silences that suddenly felt deliberate. Evelyn Johnson made the first calls. She didn't dramatize what had happened. She didn't need to. She spoke in the restrained language of disappointment, a tone that carried far more weight than outrage. "There's been a situation with Marcus," she told her sister. "We're handling it as a family," she told a longtime friend. "Aaliyah has shown remarkable grace," she told everyone who mattered. That last sentence did more damage than any accusation ever could. By noon, Marcus could feel the shift. His phone buzzed with messages that weren't quite confrontational, but weren't friendly either. Invitations were postponed. Meetings were rescheduled. A colleague he had known for years replied to a casual text with a single line, "Hope everything's okay at home." Marcus stared at the screen, irritation hardening into unease. He had always believed that his private life was insulated from consequence. That even if something surfaced, it would be contained, managed by charm, minimized by authority. What he hadn't accounted for was the kind of exposure that didn't shout, but rearranged loyalties. At home, Aaliyah Johnson watched the day unfold without commentary. She noticed the way Marcus hovered near his phone, checking it more often than usual. She noticed how he tried to initiate small talk about errands, about dinner plans, about nothing at all. Each attempt fell flat not because she rejected him, but because she no longer filled in the emotional space for him. She was present. She was calm. She was unreachable. By late afternoon, Marcus couldn't stand it anymore. "This is getting out of hand," he said, pacing the living room. "My mother had no right to involve other people." Aaliyah looked up from her book. "She didn't," she said evenly. "She spoke to family." "You knew this would happen," Marcus snapped. "You set this up. I told her where you were." Aaliyah replied. "What happened after that wasn't mine to control." Marcus stopped pacing. "You wanted to humiliate me." Aaliyah closed the book and met his gaze. "No," she said. "I wanted you to stop pretending this wouldn't matter." Her words landed with precision. Marcus scoffed, but there was no conviction behind it. "This doesn't change anything," he said. "People will forget." Aaliyah didn't argue. She had learned that the denial often spoke louder than confession. That evening, Evelyn called again. "Dinner," she said. "Tomorrow night. Family only." Marcus exhaled sharply. "Why?" "Because avoidance looks worse than honesty," Evelyn replied. "And because you owe your wife more than silence." When Marcus hung up, his hands were shaking. The dinner took place at Evelyn and Harold's house, the same dining room where Marcus had celebrated promotions and milestones, where Aaliyah had been praised for her poise and generosity. The setting was familiar. The atmosphere was not. Relatives arrived quietly. No one raised their voice. No one smiled too easily. Conversations stayed polite, restrained edged with expectation. Aaliyah arrived composed, dressed, simply her presence grounding the room. Marcus arrived, tense, already defensive. They sat. The meal began with formalities, weather travel, neutral topics. Then Evelyn set her fork down. "We're not here to pretend," she said. Silence followed. Marcus Harold said, "You've damaged this family." Marcus leaned forward. "This is between Aaliyah and me." Evelyn shook her head. "It stopped being private when you involved another woman and humiliated your wife." A cousin cleared her throat. An aunt looked away. Aaliyah remained silent. That silence spoke volumes. You didn't think Evelyn continued about what this would do to her, or to us. Marcus glanced at Aaliyah. "I never meant to hurt you." She met his eyes calmly. Intent doesn't erase impact. Her voice didn't waver. For the first time, Marcus looked genuinely unsettled. The family didn't argue. They didn't threaten. They did something far more effective. They withdrew support. Not dramatically, not all at once, but clearly. Harold spoke last. "You'll fix this," he said. "Not with excuses, with actions." "What does that mean?" Marcus asked. "It means you stop lying," Harold replied. "You stop hiding, and you accept whatever consequences follow." Marcus left the dinner knowing something fundamental had shifted. At home that night, he tried again. "I can end it," he said to Aaliyah. "I'll cut ties. We can move on." Aaliyah listened, her expression thoughtful. "That would be for you," she said. "Not for me." "What do you want then?" he demanded. She paused before answering. "I want honesty," she said. "And I want autonomy." Marcus frowned. "Autonomy, I won't negotiate my dignity," Aaliyah replied. "Not anymore." The words settled between them, heavy and unfamiliar. Days passed, then a week. Marcus's world continued to narrow. He noticed how people responded differently to him, how conversations felt shorter, how opportunities hesitated. He felt exposed in a way he had never experienced before, not publicly disgraced, but privately reevaluated. Kayla Reynolds called him repeatedly. He didn't answer. When he finally did, she was furious. "You let him throw me out like I was nothing," she said. Marcus pinched the bridge of his nose. "This is complicated." "No," Kayla shot back. "You promised." He ended the call without responding. At home, Aaliyah packed an overnight bag, not for him, but for herself. "I'm staying with a friend for a few days," she said calmly. Marcus stared at her. "Why?" "Because I need space to decide what comes next," she replied. "You're leaving me?" he asked, panic edging his voice. Aaliyah met his gaze. "I'm choosing myself." The door closed softly behind her. Marcus stood alone in the house, surrounded by the quiet consequences of his certainty. For the first time, he understood that the damage wasn't done in a single night at a hotel. It had been done over years of assuming Aaliyah would always stay. And now, she had stepped out of reach. The hotel corridor replayed in Marcus Johnson's mind long after the door to room 1418 had closed behind him. He remembered the look on his mother's face, controlled, wounded, unmistakably disappointed. He remembered the way his father had said nothing at all. Silence had followed him home like a shadow. And it did not loosen its grip. For Aaliyah Johnson, absence brought clarity. She stayed with a friend on the other side of the city, a place that smelled faintly of coffee and linen, where the walls held no shared memories. The distance was not dramatic. It was necessary. Each morning, she woke without waiting for a message, without measuring the day by Marcus's schedule. The quiet was unfamiliar at first, then liberating. Marcus, meanwhile, unraveled in small, contained ways. He tried to reassert control through routine early mornings, focused workdays, calculated charm. But the rhythm no longer responded to him. Calls went unanswered. Meetings felt shorter. The unspoken reassessment continued subtle and relentless. At the firm, a partner he trusted closed the office door and spoke carefully. "There's concern," he said. "About distractions." Marcus bristled. "My personal life isn't relevant." The partner's expression didn't change. "Everything is relevant," he replied. That evening, Marcus drove past the hotel without meaning to. The building rose clean and indifferent against the night sky. He imagined the door opening again, the moment replaying, and felt something tighten in his chest. He wasn't ashamed of the affair. He was ashamed of being seen. Aaliyah returned home 3 days later, her movements calm, deliberate. She didn't announce her arrival. She didn't explain. She unpacked her bag and resumed her life with quiet authority. Marcus watched her from the kitchen doorway. "We should talk," he said. "We are," Aaliyah replied without looking up. "No," he insisted. "Really talk." She met his gaze, then steady and unguarded. "Say what you need to say." "I'll end it," Marcus said quickly. "Completely. I've already started." Aaliyah studied him, not with hope, but with curiosity. "Is that a promise," she asked, "or a reaction?" He frowned. "Does it matter?" "Yes," she said. "Promises are about intention. Reactions are about fear." Marcus didn't answer. In the days that followed, he attempted damage control with the same confidence he had always relied on. He canceled plans with Kayla Reynolds, sent a brief message that sounded final enough to convince himself. He spoke to his parents again, offering apologies that focused more on inconvenience than accountability. Evelyn listened, then said quietly, "You still don't understand." "What don't I understand?" Marcus snapped. "That this isn't about stopping an affair," she replied. "It's about repairing what you broke." "I'm trying," he said. "No," she said. "You're trying to return things to the way they were." The difference mattered. Aaliyah watched these efforts from a distance unmoved. She had already passed the point where gestures impressed her. She was listening now for substance. One afternoon, Marcus found her in the study, organizing documents into neat piles. "What are those?" he asked. "Personal records," she replied. "I'm making copies." "For what?" "In case I need them." The phrase unsettled him more than any accusation. Need them for what? Aaliyah looked up. For clarity. He laughed nervously. "You're being dramatic." She didn't respond. That night, Marcus dreamed of the hotel door opening again, but this time no one stood behind it. The hallway stretched endlessly, lined with closed doors he couldn't enter. He woke with a sense of loss he couldn't name. The next family gathering was unavoidable. A birthday, a milestone, an event that had been planned long before the fracture, now heavy with implication. Aaliyah arrived on her own. Marcus arrived late. The room shifted when they entered, subtle glances, polite smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Conversations paused, then resumed with care. Aaliyah moved easily among them, gracious and composed. Marcus hovered near the edges, acutely aware of his altered position. At one point, an aunt took Aaliyah's hand. "You've been handling everything with such grace," she said softly. Aaliyah smiled. "Thank you." Marcus overheard. The words burned. Later, he cornered Aaliyah near the back porch. "You're letting them think I'm the villain," he hissed. "I'm letting them think whatever the truth suggests," she replied. "You're enjoying this," he accused. Aaliyah shook her head. "No, I'm finished pretending." The sentence landed with finality. That night, Marcus realized something chilling. Aaliyah no longer needed him to change. She had already adapted to a future without him. The hotel incident had not shattered her. It had freed her. Back at home, Marcus tried one last tactic: vulnerability. "I don't want to lose you," he said quietly, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. Aaliyah considered him. "You didn't want to lose your comfort," she said. "That's different." "I made a mistake," he insisted. She nodded. "Yes, and mistakes have consequences." He leaned forward. "What do you want from me?" Aaliyah paused, choosing her words carefully. "I want you to tell the truth," she said. "Not to me, to yourself." Marcus stared at her, uncertain. She continued. "I want you to understand that I won't carry the weight of your choices anymore. I won't protect your image. I won't explain you to others." "And if I can't?" he asked. "Then we'll have our answer," she replied. The following week, the truth expanded outward. A colleague declined a partnership opportunity Marcus had expected. A longtime friend stopped returning calls. A board member asked pointed questions about stability and judgment. None of it was loud. All of it was devastating. Marcus finally confronted Kayla in person, ending what remained of the relationship. She listened in disbelief, anger flashing across her face. "You used me," she said. Marcus didn't deny it. "You told me you were trapped," she continued, "that your marriage was already over." Marcus said nothing. Kayla laughed bitterly. "You're going to lose everything," she said. He already felt like he was. At home, Aaliyah began planning her next steps, not in haste, but with intention. She consulted quietly. She documented carefully. She prepared herself, not for conflict, but for resolution. The hotel door had opened once, and it had changed the course of everything. Now the consequences were unfolding not in chaos, but in order. And Aaliyah Johnson stood at the center of it all, calm, resolute, no longer waiting for permission to move forward. The consequences Marcus Johnson feared didn't arrive as a single collapse. They arrived as erosion. Each day something small slipped away, an assumption, a privilege, a door that no longer opened as easily as it once had. He began to understand that reputation wasn't lost in moments of spectacle, but in the quiet recalibration of how others saw you. At work, the shift was unmistakable. Conversations ended sooner. Decisions he would have led were now handled elsewhere. A junior associate he once mentored spoke to him with careful neutrality, as if weighing every word. Marcus recognized the signs too late. He was no longer the center of confidence. He was a liability to be assessed. When he asked a partner directly if something was wrong, the answer was polite and devastating. "People are watching," the partner said. "They're asking questions." About what Marcus demanded. Judgment, the partner replied. Discretion, stability. Marcus left the office with his jaw clenched, his certainty unraveling thread by thread. At home, Aaliyah Johnson watched him struggle without intervening. She didn't celebrate his discomfort. She didn't weaponize it. She simply refused to cushion it. She had stopped explaining him to others, stopped correcting assumptions, stopped smoothing over awkward silences. If someone asked how she was doing, she answered honestly but briefly. If someone asked about Marcus, she didn't. That absence of defense spoke louder than any accusation. One afternoon, Marcus returned home early, his frustration sharp and unfocused. "You're letting people think I'm unstable," he said. Aaliyah looked up from her laptop. "People are drawing conclusions based on what they see. And you're fine with that. I'm not responsible for managing your image," she replied calmly. "I managed it for years. I'm done." The words landed without malice, and that made them harder to fight. Marcus paced the room. "This is spiraling. It's clarifying." Aaliyah corrected. Meanwhile, the truth reached places Marcus couldn't control. A longtime family friend declined an invitation to dinner. An uncle offered advice instead of admiration. At a charity event, Marcus attended alone. A donor spoke warmly to Aaliyah later that week and never mentioned Marcus at all. He had become peripheral in rooms where he once commanded attention. The worst part wasn't the judgment. It was the uncertainty, the sense that people were quietly deciding what kind of man he was and where to place him as a result. Aaliyah felt none of that uncertainty. She had crossed into a different emotional territory, one where clarity replaced hope. She was no longer waiting for Marcus to prove anything. She was evaluating what she wanted her future to require. One evening, she invited him to sit with her at the dining table. The tone was neutral, the setting deliberate. "I've been thinking about next steps," she said. Marcus leaned forward alert. "So have I." She nodded. "Good. I want to fix this," he said quickly, "whatever it takes." Aaliyah folded her hands. "Then listen." He fell silent. "I need transparency," she continued. "Complete. I need autonomy over my own finances and decisions. And I need space, real space, to determine whether reconciliation is even possible." Marcus frowned. "You're asking for separation." "I'm asking for reality," she said. He scoffed. "This feels extreme." Aaliyah met his gaze steadily. So does betrayal. The conversation ended without resolution, but something had shifted again. Marcus was no longer negotiating from a position of strength. He was responding to conditions he didn't control. Days later, Kayla Reynolds reached out to Aaliyah directly. The message was brief, tense, and unapologetic. "We need to talk." Aaliyah stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted it. She wasn't interested in closure that required her participation. Kayla was part of Marcus's choices, not hers. When Marcus found out, he reacted with unexpected anger. "She reached out to you." "Yes," Aaliyah said. "And you didn't tell me I didn't need to," she replied. His frustration flared. "You're cutting me out." "I'm stepping back," she said. "There's a difference." That night, Marcus realized how completely the power dynamic had shifted. Aaliyah was no longer reacting to him. She was moving independently, guided by her own judgment. The erosion continued. A potential business opportunity dissolved without explanation. A mentor suggested Marcus take some time to focus on personal matters. His name was no longer mentioned in conversations about future leadership. He tried to blame Aaliyah. He tried to blame his family. He even tried to blame Kayla. But late at night, alone with his thoughts, he confronted a harder truth. He had built his life on the assumption that consequences were negotiable. They were not. Aaliyah, meanwhile, began reclaiming parts of herself she had long set aside. She revisited interests she had postponed, reconnected with friends she had drifted from, made plans without checking anyone else's schedule. She didn't announce these changes. She lived them. One afternoon, Aaliyah Johnson invited Aaliyah for tea. "You've handled this with strength," Evelyn said quietly. "I didn't expect it." Aaliyah smiled faintly. "Neither did I." Evelyn hesitated. "Marcus is struggling." Aaliyah met her gaze. "I know, and you don't feel responsible." Aaliyah paused, choosing honesty over politeness. "I feel responsible for myself." Evelyn nodded slowly. "That's fair." The conversation ended with mutual respect, but no illusions. At home, Marcus packed and unpacked the same bag, repeatedly unsure where he belonged. The house felt different now. Not hostile, but indifferent. One evening, he stood in the doorway of the bedroom and asked, "Do you still love me?" Aaliyah considered the question carefully. "I care about you," she said. "But love without trust isn't enough." He nodded, absorbing the finality in her tone. As weeks passed, Marcus's world continued to shrink, not dramatically, but decisively. The scaffolding that had once held him upright, family pride, professional admiration, marital stability, had been removed one piece at a time. Aaliyah watched from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with resolve. This wasn't revenge. This was alignment. The truth had been revealed, witnessed and absorbed. Now the path forward demanded decisions not fueled by anger, but by clarity. And Aaliyah Johnson was ready to make hers. Marcus Johnson had always believed confidence could outrun consequences. For most of his life, it had. When problems surfaced, he smoothed them over. When people questioned him, he reframed the narrative. When something cracked, he patched it quickly and moved on. He had learned early that certainty delivered calmly and without apology often convinced others to doubt their own instincts. So when his world began to contract, he responded the only way he knew how, with arrogance disguised as composure. He told himself the distance at work was temporary, that family tension would soften with time, that Aaliyah's calm was a phase and emotional reaction she would eventually tire of maintaining. He told himself this because the alternative required something far more difficult: accountability. One evening, after another day of unanswered emails and postponed meetings, Marcus returned home determined to reassert control. He found Aaliyah in the living room, reviewing documents spread neatly across the coffee table. She looked up as he entered, her expression neutral. "We need to reset," he said, standing over her. "This has gone far enough." Aaliyah didn't flinch. "What do you mean by reset?" "I mean, we move forward," he replied. "We stop involving other people. We keep this between us." She closed the folder in front of her. "That would require honesty," she said. And consistency. I've been honest, Marcus snapped. Aaliyah studied him for a long moment. You've been selective, she replied. He exhaled sharply, irritation bubbling over. You're acting like I destroyed your life. No, she said calmly. You revealed it. The distinction infuriated him. Marcus turned away, pacing. You're enjoying this power, he said. You like watching everyone turn on me. Aaliyah stood her movements unhurried. If that were true, she said, I would be doing far more. He stopped. What's that supposed to mean? It means I haven't taken anything from you, she replied. I stopped protecting you. There's a difference. Marcus laughed bitterly. You think you're teaching me a lesson. I'm not teaching you anything, Aaliyah said. I'm choosing how much access you have to me. The word struck him harder than any accusation. Access. He had never considered that something he once assumed was permanent could be revoked. The next day, Marcus doubled down. At work, he pushed harder, spoke louder, asserted himself in meetings that no longer belonged to him. The response was polite but distant. When he suggested a bold initiative, the room fell quiet before someone gently redirected the conversation. Afterward, a colleague pulled him aside. You're forcing it, he said. That's not helping. Marcus bristled. I built this place. Yes, the colleague replied. And now people are watching how you handle pressure. The implication was clear. That evening, Marcus met with a longtime friend, hoping for reassurance. He spoke confidently, downplaying the situation, framing it as a misunderstanding, amplified by family overreaction. The friend listened, then said quietly, You don't sound remorseful. Marcus stiffened. I'm being realistic. You sound defensive, the friend corrected. That's different. Marcus left early, unsettled. At home, Aaliyah continued preparing quietly for a future Marcus was no longer certain included him. She made appointments. She consulted privately. She gathered information not out of spite, but foresight. Marcus noticed the change in her posture, the way she moved through the house with intention. He had always assumed her stillness meant patience. Now he understood it had been preparation. One night, he confronted her again. You're planning something, he said. Aaliyah didn't deny it. I'm planning clarity. For who he demanded. For me. The answer left no room for argument. Marcus's arrogance began to crack, not all at once, but in moments. When his mother stopped calling as often. When his father's advice grew colder, more procedural. When Aaliyah declined to attend an event with him, not angrily, but simply because she didn't want to. He tried to reframe his fear as irritation. She's overplaying her hand, he told himself. She'll come around. But deep down, he sensed something had shifted beyond recovery. The turning point came during a meeting he had expected to lead. Instead, the agenda moved forward without him. His name wasn't mentioned. When he spoke, the room acknowledged him politely, then moved on. Marcus sat there, invisible for the first time in his professional life. That night, he returned home silent. Aaliyah noticed but didn't ask. Later, he spoke quietly, almost to himself. They don't trust me anymore. Aaliyah met his gaze. Trust isn't automatic, she said. It's cumulative. He nodded slowly, the truth settling in. In the days that followed, Marcus's confidence became brittle. He tried to mask it with charm, with decisiveness, with forced optimism. But the people around him felt the strain. They responded with distance. His arrogance, the shield he had relied on, no longer protected him. It isolated him. One evening, he finally asked a question without defensiveness. What happens if you leave? He said. Aaliyah paused. Then I build a life that doesn't require me to shrink. And me? He asked. She considered him carefully. You face the consequences of the life you built. The honesty in her voice stripped away any remaining illusion. Marcus understood then that this wasn't a punishment imposed on him. It was the natural result of choices he had made repeatedly confidently without regard for impact. His arrogance had told him he was untouchable. Reality disagreed. As Aaliyah turned off the lights and moved upstairs, Marcus remained in the darkened room, finally forced to confront a truth He could no longer negotiate. Power once lost could not be demanded back. And silence, hers, had proven stronger than all his certainty. The truth, when Aaliyah Johnson finally released it, did not arrive as a dramatic revelation. It arrived as documentation. Marcus noticed the change on a quiet Sunday morning. The house was still sunlight cutting clean lines across the dining table. Aaliyah sat across from him, a slim folder placed neatly in front of her. No tension, no raised voice, just intent. "I need you to listen," she said. Marcus leaned back, arms crossed. "I'm listening." She opened the folder. Inside were copies, bank statements, timelines, printed confirmations notes dated and organized. Not accusations, records. "What is this?" he asked, irritation flaring. "This," Aaliyah said calmly, "is what happens when someone assumes silence means ignorance." She slid the first page toward him. A hotel receipt. Another. A pattern unmistakable. Dates aligned with the nights he had been working late. Charges mirrored the periods he had been distant, impatient, absent. Marcus scoffed. "You've been spying on me." "I've been paying attention," she replied. "There's a difference." She turned another page. A breakdown of shared finances, how money had been redirected, how accounts had been used without discussion, how assumptions had replaced consent. Marcus's confidence wavered. "Why are you doing this now?" "Because clarity requires facts," Aaliyah said. "And I'm done being told my discomfort is imaginary." He leaned forward, anger sharpening his voice. "So what, you've been collecting evidence like I'm on trial?" "No," she said. "I've been preparing for reality." The words unsettled him more than the documents themselves. Aaliyah continued, her tone measured. "You've been living as if our marriage was optional, as if transparency was something you could offer selectively." "I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I made decisions that would affect the rest of my life." Marcus flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening. "You went behind my back." "I went around your lies," she corrected. He slammed the folder shut. "This is manipulative." Aaliyah didn't react. "What's manipulative," she said quietly, "is rewriting the truth until the other person doubts their own perception." The accusation landed with precision. For the first time, Marcus didn't argue immediately. He looked at the folder again, then at her, uncertainty creeping into his posture. "You planned this," he said slowly. "I planned for myself," Aaliyah replied. "Because you didn't." He exhaled sharply. "What do you want?" Aaliyah didn't answer right away. She had learned that urgency favored the person least prepared to act. "I want honesty," she said finally. "Not promises, not apologies. Honesty about who you've been and what you're willing to change." "I said I'd end it," Marcus snapped. "You said a lot of things," she replied. "Consistency is what matters." He rubbed his face, frustration edging into panic. "You're turning this into something bigger than it needs to be." Aaliyah shook her head. "You turned it into this when you decided consequences didn't apply to you." Silence stretched between them. Marcus stood and paced the room, suddenly too small. "You're trying to corner me." "I'm setting boundaries," she said. "There's a difference." He stopped. "And if I don't accept them," Aaliyah met his gaze steadily, "then I proceed without you." The certainty in her voice stripped away the last of his bravado. That afternoon, Marcus called his parents. Evelyn listened as he spoke, his tone defensive at first, then increasingly strained. He mentioned the folder. He mentioned Aaliyah's demands. Evelyn let him finish before responding. "She's not demanding," she said. "She's deciding. That's not fair." Marcus argued. "Fairness isn't the issue," Evelyn replied. "Accountability is." Harold spoke next. "You're facing the consequences of your actions," he said. "That's not punishment. That's reality." Marcus hung up feeling exposed, no longer shielded by family loyalty. In the days that followed, he attempted a different approach. He became softer, quieter. He apologized without qualifiers. He offered transparency passwords, schedules access. He promised counseling, change, growth. Aaliyah listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't dismiss him. She simply observed. When he finished, she said, "These are steps you should take regardless of what I decide." "What does that mean?" he asked. It means your integrity shouldn't depend on my forgiveness. The distinction unsettled him. One evening, Marcus found her reviewing the folder again, adding notes. "You're really prepared to leave?" he said. Aaliyah looked up. "I'm prepared to choose myself." The words echoed through the space between them. Marcus's fear surfaced then, not as anger, but as desperation. "I don't know who I am without this," he admitted. Aaliyah softened slightly, not with pity, but clarity. "That's something you need to discover," she said. "Not something I can fix." The truth she had uncovered wasn't just about his infidelity. It was about imbalance, about how often she had carried emotional labor while he carried entitlement, about how easily he had assumed her presence was guaranteed. She wasn't punishing him. She was correcting the equation. As the week ended, Aaliyah scheduled a meeting neutral ground professional contained. Marcus watched her prepare, realizing with a sinking certainty that this was no longer a negotiation between spouses. It was a reckoning between truth and illusion. And this time, truth had the upper hand. The meeting took place on a Tuesday morning, in a room designed to feel neutral glass walls, muted colors, no personal history clinging to the furniture. Aaliyah Johnson chose the location carefully. It wasn't a battlefield. It was a boundary. Marcus arrived early, restless, his confidence now a thin shell. He checked his phone twice before Aaliyah entered, then stood too quickly when she did. She acknowledged him with a nod and took her seat, setting her folder on the table with deliberate calm. There was no greeting, no small talk. "This isn't a trial," Aaliyah said, opening the folder. "It's a reckoning." Marcus swallowed. "I told you I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Aaliyah met his eyes. "Then listen without defending yourself." He nodded. She began with facts, not accusations. Timelines. Financial decisions made without consent. Patterns of absence. The emotional labor she had carried quietly for years. She didn't dramatize. She didn't raise her voice. She simply named what had happened in order without embellishment. Marcus tried to interrupt once. She raised her hand gently. "Please," she said. "You've spoken uninterrupted for a long time. This is my turn." He leaned back, chastened. When she finished, the room felt still, as if the air itself were absorbing the truth. Marcus stared at the table, the magnitude of it finally settling in. "I didn't realize," he said quietly. Aaliyah tilted her head. "You realized," she replied. "You just decided it was manageable. The difference mattered." He exhaled, shoulders slumping. "What happens now?" Aaliyah closed the folder. "Now we stop pretending this is only about an affair." She outlined her terms not as threats, but as conditions for any future interaction. Financial independence, full transparency, time apart to assess whether reconciliation was even possible. Counseling, yes, but not as a performance. As work. Marcus listened, the weight of each condition pressing in. "And if I agree?" he asked. "Agreement isn't enough," Aaliyah said. "Consistency is." He nodded again, slower this time. "I'll do it." Aaliyah didn't respond immediately. She had learned that urgency often disguised fear. Outside the room, the consequences continued to unfold. Marcus's parents had made their position clear, not publicly, but decisively. Support would no longer be unconditional. Trust would have to be rebuilt, not assumed. Invitations came with caveats. Advice came with expectations. Evelyn Johnson spoke to Aaliyah later that week, her voice steady but heavy. "We raised him better than this," she said. Aaliyah replied gently, "Then let him become better." Evelyn was silent for a moment. "We stand with you," she said finally. "Whatever you decide." That support mattered not because Aaliyah needed validation, but because it closed the door Marcus had hoped might remain ajar. There would be no quiet alliance to rescue him from accountability. At work, the reckoning deepened. Marcus was asked to step back from a leadership role temporarily. The word landed like a verdict. He argued at first, then stopped when he realized no one was listening. The decision had already been made. He went home that evening, subdued, the house echoing with a new kind of quiet. Aaliyah noticed the shift, but didn't comment. She had learned that letting people sit with consequences was often the most humane response. Over the following weeks, Marcus attempted to change not performatively, but unevenly. Some days he showed up with humility. Other days, resentment leaked through. The work of accountability proved harder than he had imagined. Aaliyah remained steady. She kept her routines. She honored her boundaries. She didn't rush toward forgiveness or closure. She allowed space for reality to reveal itself. One night, Marcus asked, "Do you think I deserve another chance?" Aaliyah considered the question carefully. "Deserving isn't the metric," she said. "Reliability is." He nodded, absorbing the distinction. As time passed, the social landscape around them settled into a new alignment. Friends adjusted their expectations. Family recalibrated their roles. The chaos Marcus had feared never arrived, not because the damage wasn't real, but because it was being addressed without spectacle. This was justice, without noise. One evening, Aaliyah invited Marcus to sit with her again, not to negotiate, but to conclude a chapter. "I've made a decision," she said. His breath caught. "What is it I'm choosing?" Distance, Aaliyah replied. "Not as punishment, as clarity." He looked at her, searching for anger he could argue with. "There was none. I need to know who I am without managing your choices," she continued. "And you need to learn who you are without my protection." Marcus nodded slowly. "Is this goodbye?" "It's a boundary," she said. "What comes after depends on what you do with it." The weeks that followed were quiet, purposeful. Marcus moved into a separate space. Aaliyah reclaimed her home. She reorganized rooms, donated items, made the space reflect who she was becoming, not who she had been accommodating. Friends noticed the change in her posture, the ease in her voice. "You seem lighter," one said. "I am," Aaliyah replied. The justice she had sought wasn't about watching Marcus fall. It was about restoring balance within herself, within the truth. Marcus faced the slow work of rebuilding without shortcuts, without guarantees. Some relationships returned cautiously, others didn't. He learned painfully that trust was not a lever to be pulled, but a structure to be rebuilt piece by piece. Aaliyah watched none of this with triumph. She watched it with peace. Because justice, she had learned, didn't require vengeance. It required alignment between actions and outcomes, between truth and consequence. And for the first time in a long while, her life felt aligned. Distance changed everything, not because it created absence, but because it revealed what had been obscured by proximity. With Marcus living elsewhere, the house took on a different rhythm. Mornings were quieter. Evenings felt intentional. Aaliyah Johnson noticed how easily she breathed, without anticipating another explanation, another recalibration of mood. The space no longer asked her to negotiate her presence. She didn't rush to fill it. Instead, she let it settle. Marcus, on the other hand, struggled with the stillness. In his new apartment, time stretched uncomfortably. Without Aaliyah's quiet competence smoothing the edges of his days, small tasks felt heavier. Decisions lingered. The confidence he once wore like armor now felt ill-fitting. He called her less often than he wanted to. When he did, he kept his voice careful, as if any misstep might end the conversation entirely. "How are you?" he asked one evening. "I'm well," Aaliyah replied. There was nothing in her tone he could grasp, no invitation, no distance. Just truth. "I've been going to the sessions," he said, offering proof without being asked. "I'm doing the work. I'm glad," she said. "That's it?" he asked, frustration slipping through. "You're not going to say anything else?" Aaliyah paused. "Your work is for you," she said, "not for my approval." The line went quiet. Marcus ended the call with a polite goodbye, the words echoing long after. He understood then that accountability, when genuine, demanded endurance without reward. Meanwhile, Aaliyah continued shaping her days around her own priorities. She reconnected with colleagues she had deferred to Marcus's schedule. She accepted invitations she would once have declined, out of habit. She reintroduced herself to parts of her life she had set aside, quietly believing there would be time later. Later had arrived. One afternoon, she sat with Aaliyah Johnson over tea. The conversation was calm, respectful. Two women no longer united by obligation, but by mutual understanding. "He's trying," Evelyn said carefully. "I know," Aaliyah replied. "Does that change anything?" Aaliyah considered the question. "It changes him," she said. "It doesn't change my needs." Evelyn nodded, absorbing the distinction. "You're not cruel," she said. "You're clear." Clarity, Aaliyah had learned, was often mistaken for coldness by those who benefited from confusion. The decisive moment came unexpectedly. Marcus asked to meet neutral ground, early evening, no agenda. Aaliyah agreed, not out of hope, but completeness. They sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, the same kind where truth had first solidified months earlier. This time, there were no secrets to uncover. "I've been thinking," Marcus began, his voice steady but subdued. "About everything. About who I've been." Aaliyah listened. "I know I can't undo what I did," he continued, "but I want to know if there's any path forward for us." She didn't answer immediately. She had anticipated this moment and still refused to rehearse it. "Before I answer," she said, "I need to ask you something." He nodded. "If nothing ever returned to what it was, if there were no guarantee of reconciliation, would you still do the work you're doing now?" Marcus hesitated. The pause told her everything. "I'd try," he said finally. Aaliyah met his eyes. "Trying is what you did before," she said gently. "I need to know who you are without needing me to stay." He swallowed. "I don't know yet." "That's honest," she said. "And honesty matters." She took a breath, grounding herself in the clarity she had earned. "I made my decision," Aaliyah said. Marcus straightened, bracing. "I'm not going back," she continued. "Not to the marriage as it was. Not to the dynamic we had." He nodded slowly, pain flickering across his face. "So this is it? This is me choosing a future that doesn't require me to diminish myself," she replied. "That future doesn't include rebuilding what broke me." Silence stretched between them, heavy but clean. "I respect that," Marcus said quietly. Aaliyah inclined her head. "I hope you build something better," she said. "For yourself." They stood the finality, settling without drama. No tears, no accusations. Just an ending, shaped by truth. Afterward, Aaliyah walked alone through the city, the evening air cool against her skin. She felt the familiar pull of memory loosen, replaced by something steadier. Freedom wasn't loud. It was precise. In the weeks that followed, she formalized what had already become reality. Papers were signed without spectacle. Arrangements were made with civility. There were no battles, no scorched earth, only alignment. Marcus complied without protest. He had learned at last that resistance only delayed what was inevitable. Aaliyah moved forward with intention. She set goals that belonged solely to her. She invested time where it returned energy instead of draining it. She allowed herself to imagine a life not defined by recovery, but by expansion. Friends noticed the difference. "You seem anchored," one said. "I am," Aaliyah replied. Marcus, from a distance, observed her transformation with a mix of regret and respect. He understood now that what he had lost wasn't just a marriage. It was access to a woman who had outgrown the version of herself he had relied on. And Aaliyah Johnson, having chosen decisively, did not look back. The life Aaliyah Johnson built afterward did not announce itself with milestones or declarations. It arrived quietly through mornings that began without tension and evenings that ended without rehearsal. It arrived through choices that belonged to her alone. She started small not because her vision was limited, but because she trusted momentum more than spectacle. She rearranged her home so that it reflected how she moved now, fewer reminders, more light. Rooms once organized around compromise were repurposed around intention. A chair by the window became a place for thinking. A cleared shelf became a place for books she had meant to read for years. Work followed the same pattern. Aaliyah had always been competent. What changed was how she occupied space. She spoke when she meant to, not when silence felt safer. She accepted opportunities without checking anyone else's calendar. She declined others without apology. Colleagues noticed, not because she demanded attention, but because she no longer minimized her presence. "You're different," one of them said after a meeting. "I'm aligned," Aaliyah replied. The word felt right. She didn't rush to redefine herself through another relationship. That temptation, so common after rupture, never appealed to her. Healing, she understood now, wasn't about replacement. It was about integration, about becoming whole without borrowing stability from someone else. Some evenings, she walked the city alone, not to escape quiet, but to enjoy it. She learned the rhythm of her own thoughts again, unfiltered by anticipation or management. She noticed how easily her body relaxed when it wasn't braced for disappointment. Marcus Johnson watched this from a distance. He heard about her progress through mutual acquaintances. He noticed her absence in rooms where she had once stood by his side, quietly supporting. The space she left behind did not close. It remained conspicuous. His own rebuilding was slower, more uneven. Accountability, once begun, had to be sustained without reward. Some days he did well. Others he faltered. The difference now was that no one absorbed the impact for him. He learned what it meant to carry his own weight. When they crossed paths, rarely briefly, it was with civility, not warmth. Respect had replaced familiarity. Marcus recognized with a clarity that came too late that the woman he had taken for granted had evolved beyond the life he had offered her. Aaliyah felt no triumph in this realization. Triumph suggested competition. She felt closure. One afternoon, Evelyn Johnson reached out asking to meet. The request was tentative and careful. Aaliyah agreed. They sat together in a quiet restaurant, sunlight falling softly across the table. The conversation moved easily, no longer bound by obligation. "I wanted to thank you," Evelyn said finally. "For what?" Aaliyah asked. "For showing us what integrity looks like," Evelyn replied, "without cruelty." Aaliyah considered the words. "Integrity isn't loud," she said. "It just refuses to disappear." Evelyn nodded, eyes thoughtful. "You taught my son something he couldn't learn from us." Aaliyah didn't respond immediately. "I hope he keeps learning," she said. When they parted, there was no lingering tension, only mutual respect. A chapter had closed without bitterness. As months passed, Aaliyah's life expanded in ways that felt natural, not reactive. She pursued projects that required focus and creativity. She traveled when she felt the pull to see something new. She rested when rest was needed. There was no urgency to prove anything. That she realized was the truest measure of freedom. Occasionally, she thought back to the night that had changed everything, the hotel confirmation, the room number glowing on her screen. The moment that could have broken her had she chosen noise over precision. She didn't regret her restraint. Restraint had been her strength. One evening at a gathering of friends, someone asked how she had managed to move on without anger. Aaliyah smiled gently. "Anger wants an audience," she said. "Peace wants alignment." The words settled into the room, received with understanding. Later that night, alone in her home, Aaliyah stood by the window and looked out at the city lights. She felt grounded, not because life was perfect, but because it was hers. The silence around her was not empty. It was complete. Marcus elsewhere sat with the knowledge that some losses were not punishments, but instructions. He carried the lesson forward imperfectly, but sincerely. And Aaliyah Johnson continued forward without looking back, not because she had erased the past, but because she had integrated it. She had learned that justice did not always arrive as collapse. Sometimes it arrived as clarity, as boundaries honored, as a life rebuilt without bitterness. She had learned that power did not require volume, that the most enduring transformations were quiet. And in that quiet, she found something better than revenge. She found herself. The final shift did not come with an announcement. It arrived the way truth always does, after everything unnecessary had fallen away. Aaliyah Johnson no longer measured time by what she had survived. The story that once defined her had loosened its grip, becoming context instead of identity. She woke each morning grounded, not braced. The tension that had once lived in her shoulders, in her breath, had dissolved into something steadier: trust in herself. She had learned that strength did not require endurance forever. It required discernment. The people around her sensed it. Conversations with Aaliyah felt different now, unhurried, honest, unweighted by expectation. She no longer over-explained or softened her clarity for comfort. She didn't need to. One afternoon, during a professional event she had attended alone, a colleague pulled her aside. "I heard what you went through," the woman said carefully. "I don't know how you handled it so quietly." Aaliyah smiled. "I didn't handle it quietly," she replied. "I handled it deliberately." That distinction mattered. Across town, Marcus Johnson faced the long echo of consequences, the kind that didn't fade once the initial shock passed. Some relationships had returned cautiously, others had not. Trust, he learned, was not restored through apology, but through consistency over time. He thought often of Aaliyah, not with longing, but with clarity. He understood now that what he had lost was not simply a marriage, but a partnership built on dignity he had failed to honor. He had mistaken her steadiness for permanence, her silence for compliance. He had been wrong. When news reached him of Aaliyah's latest success, a project completed, recognition earned, he felt no bitterness, only respect. She had not needed to destroy him to rise. She had simply stepped out of the shadow he assumed she would remain in. Months later, their paths crossed one final time, briefly, unexpectedly, at a public place neither had chosen for significance. They acknowledged each other with a nod. No tension, no nostalgia, just recognition. Marcus spoke first. "You look well." "I am," Aaliyah replied. He hesitated. "I'm trying to be." She nodded. "That's enough to start." There was nothing more to say. They parted without looking back. Aaliyah continued walking her steps unhurried, her posture relaxed. The moment passed without drama, without weight. It was simply proof that she had completed the journey, not toward forgiveness, not toward vindication, but toward alignment. The woman she had become did not require validation from the past. She understood now that justice was not about watching someone fall. It was about refusing to fall with them. It was about choosing precision over noise, boundaries over battles, truth over performance. The night Marcus had taken his mistress to a hotel, he believed he was acting freely. He believed he was unseen. He believed the woman waiting at home would absorb the impact quietly, as she always had. What he never understood until it was too late was that Aaliyah Johnson's silence had never been weakness. It had been observation. And when she finally acted, she did not scream. She did not beg. She did not destroy. She chose the right moment, the right witnesses, and the right exit. That was her power. Now, standing fully in her own life, Aaliyah felt no need to revisit the story that had brought her here. It belonged to the past, a chapter closed with intention, not bitterness. She had learned the rarest lesson of all: you do not need to be loud to be unstoppable. You do not need revenge to reclaim yourself, and you do not need permission to leave what no longer honors you. Her strength was quiet, her justice was complete, and her future was entirely her own. Some stories stay with us not because of the pain they describe, but because of the strength they reveal. Aaliyah's journey reminds us that real power does not always arrive with raised voices or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes the strongest response to betrayal is not revenge, but clarity. Not noise, but precision. She didn't fight to be heard. She chose when and where the truth would speak for itself. And in doing so, she protected something far more valuable than pride or dignity. Life often teaches us that silence means weakness. But this story shows the opposite. Silence, when chosen, not imposed, can be a strategy. It can be space to observe, to understand, to prepare. True empowerment begins the moment we stop begging for respect and start acting in alignment with our worth. Aaliyah didn't win because someone else lost. She won because she refused to shrink herself to keep peace. She learned that love without trust is not safety, and endurance without dignity is not strength. Healing didn't come from watching someone fall. It came from walking away without hatred, without regret, and without looking back. If you've ever felt underestimated, dismissed, or quietly betrayed, let this story remind you, you don't need to explain your pain to justify your boundaries. You don't need permission to choose yourself. And you don't need revenge to reclaim your life. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What part of this story resonated with you the most? Have you ever found strength in walking away quietly? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories about resilience, justice, and quiet empowerment speak to you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more stories like this.